Welcome back to the World Trade Webcast. This week on the World Trade Webcast, our guest is Kimberly Gianopoulos, Director of the International Affairs and Trade Team at the U.S. Government Accounting Office. Kim, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
So yesterday we talked in general about the report, and today I was hoping we could get into some more specifics. The U.S. recent FTAs have served as a means of securing commitments from trade partners to uphold and protect internationally recognized labor rights. And further, although the USTR and the Department of Labor jointly pledged in 2009 to adopt a more assertive interagency approach to monitoring and enforcing FTA labor provisions, in practice, the agencies systematically investigate possible inconsistencies with these provisions, primarily in response to labor submissions. So I guess the question is, why haven't the USTR and the Department of Labor developed a more strategic approach to responding to labor concerns?
Well, let me talk a little bit about what we found, and for the answer to the why question, I think you'd have to talk to folks over at those agencies. But what we found was agencies overall have given greater political and organizational priority to monitoring and enforcement of FTA labor provisions since our 2009 report, when we made the recommendations about the need for greater monitoring and enforcement across the board. Both DOL and USTR provided evidence to us that those monitoring and enforcement activities have sometimes led to a strengthening of FTA partners' labor laws that might not have occurred absent those activities. Nevertheless, our assessment is that both agencies, both USTR and Department of Labor, have not demonstrated a proactive and systematic approach to monitoring and enforcement FTA partner compliance with those labor commitments, with the exception of a few partner countries that they focus their work on. For example, a lot of the effort from the Department of Labor focuses on those labor submissions that I mentioned in the previous segment. They spend a great deal of their time in this context responding to the concerns that are raised in a formal context, as opposed to doing other activities that would lead them towards greater monitoring and enforcement of the FTA labor provisions.
Thanks, Kim. And with the current report that just came out, what are the recommendations for moving forward with an enforcement protocol, really a monitoring and enforcement protocol that would start to address some of these concerns?
Well, what we looked for in the current report, after having made the recommendations in the 2009 report, in the current report we were looking for two main things. We were looking for evidence that both USTR and the Department of Labor were taking steps to ensure that each FTA partner had the requisite laws in place by the time the president determined the FTA could enter into force. And secondly, we were looking for evidence that both agencies had taken steps to ensure that the partners were enforcing those laws and maintaining labor rights in both law and practice since the FTAs entered into force. And as you know, different FTAs enter into force at different times. So in some cases, we only had a couple of years to look at, and in other cases, we had up to 10 years of history to look at. We consider the approach to monitoring and enforcement that USTR outlines to be broadly compatible with the definitions of monitoring and enforcement and the key elements that we identified in our report. There are actually 6 main steps that are included in monitoring and enforcement. The first one is gathering and analyzing information. The second was setting priorities. The third is identifying compliance problems. The fourth is developing and implementing responses. And the fifth is taking enforcement actions. The final one is coordinating with other agencies who have responsibility in this area. And our recommendations are not prescriptive. That is, the recommendations we've made in this report do not exactly specify what steps that USTR, Department of Labor, with the support of the State Department, need to do, because we feel the agencies have the best sense of how to use the resources and programs at their disposal.
So that makes a lot of sense. But what actually will motivate the USTR and the Department of Labor to take steps? I mean, you know, we saw the 2009 report already requested that, or suggested that these agencies be proactive, and here we are now in 2014 and we're kind of revisiting this.
Right. I think in the context of the current trade negotiations, Congress needs to have the best information it possibly can get to make decisions about how to move forward, whether to ratify these trade agreements or take other steps. And one of our recommendations, which I believe we're going to be talking about in a little bit, talks about the need for these agencies to report to Congress with clear information on what's going on with regard to the labor provisions in these free trade agreements. USTR is actually in statute required to report on the free trade agreements in its annual report to Congress. The other two agencies, State and Department of Labor, are not required by statute, but we think it's very important for them to include some of this information on monitoring and enforcement in their reports to Congress.
Kim, thanks for the insights. We're out of time today, but we'll continue this conversation on the GAO report and the labor provisions in the free trade agreements. For our latest schedule of upcoming webcasts, subscribe to us with any of the links below and bookmark this page. All of our previous webcasts can be found right here at thinkglobal.com/webcast. And thanks for watching.